Morning light makes the kitchen a small theater, spoons and cups arranged like actors waiting for a cue. A kettle breathes faint steam, and the motion of making coffee begins a sequence whose rhythm quietly organizes the coming hours. That small sequence is a ritual, not ornamental, but infrastructural, a stitched pattern that turns the raw material of time into a format the mind can process. Rituals anchor attention by converting ambiguity into choreography, and choreography reduces cognitive load so that sustained work becomes more probable than random drift. Rituals operate on several planes at once. At the sensory plane, they supply reliable cues, sounds and textures that the nervous system learns to interpret as signals for particular cognitive states. At the cognitive plane, rituals collapse decision trees into practice sequences that minimize wasted deliberation. At the social plane, rituals synchronize groups, creating shared temporal expectations that reduce coordination cost. At the historical plane, rituals bind present acts into longer arcs of continuity that exceed individual lifetimes and preserve practices across generations. Modern life complicates ritual because environments are saturated with engineered novelty. Devices emit persistent signals designed to capture fleeting attention. Streams of information present themselves as an endless buffet, and the cost of selecting what to engage with rises. In that context, clear rituals act as filters that protect bandwidth. A ritual with distinct sensory markers and low friction performs better than elaborate sequences that demand high maintenance. The design rule is simple. Clarity resists capture, and specificity prevents ritual from collapsing into the same noise the ritual is meant to resist. Simplicity supports durability because rituals that are easy to perform are resilient to interruption. A two-step morning sequence that combines light exposure with a short notation practice consumes little time but produces a bootstrap effect for the day. Over weeks, that bootstrap accumulates because the initial rituals create pathways of coherence that reduce the cognitive overhead for subsequent deep work. The compounding effect of small, repeated acts is the secret power of ritual as infrastructure. Small investments that yield large structural returns through repetition and reinforcement. Rituals depend on feedback and repair. Cultural systems that preserve long-lived practices commonly embed review points where sequences are evaluated and adjusted. When rituals ossify, they risk becoming hollow performances detached from aim. Resilient ritual cultures combine routine with reflection so that surface forms can adapt while core affordances remain stable. The meta-ritual of review is itself an important design element because it prevents ritual from calcifying in ways that undermine function, and because it turns fidelity into a living practice rather than a fossil. Transitions between contexts are especially vulnerable to attention leakage. The boundary between work and home, for instance, often produces role conflict and cognitive residue. Short-state reset sequences act as valves that grade the shift between domains. A change of clothing, a moment of breath, a brief walk, these rituals signal a shift of topology and reduce cross-contamination of tasks. The deliberate framing of transitions is a cheap and powerful architecture for sustaining different modes of attention across the course of a day. At the group level, ritual scales into social protocols that lower coordination costs. Teams that open with a shared focus statement and then enter a fixed period of silent work reduce the negotiation overhead around when deep effort is permissible. The ritual supplies a public ledger of consent to focus. Over time, such shared patterns create an expectation that deep work is the norm rather than the exception. The social reinforcement is key because public practice makes personal adherence easier and because mutual visibility converts private discipline into collective habit. Tempo choices matter. Rituals are not all slow. Some are brisk and kinetic, priming rapid, coordinated action. Others are slow and meditative, designed to allow integration, reflection, and synthesis. Designing a balanced portfolio of rituals across a calendar creates an ecology of tempos. This ecology supports exploration, repair, and mastery by spacing novelty and consolidation in ways that respect neural recovery cycles and circadian rhythms. The deliberate alternation of tempo is a form of attentional hygiene that cultivates different cognitive capacities. The neurobiology of repetition explains why rituals work. Repeated sequences strengthen synaptic pathways and allow a redistribution of cognitive energy. The basal ganglia automate habitual sequences so frontal networks are freed for complex reasoning. This redistribution does not remove agency. It reallocates effort from routine maintenance to the unpredictable tasks that require conscious attention. Ritual is therefore an efficiency device that trades small, repeated effort for sustained cognitive availability and creative work. Learning systems thrive when ritual scaffolds are in place. Education that integrates ritualized transitions, repeated spaced review, and pause structures produces higher retention. Rituals operate as scaffolds for memory consolidation by aligning environmental cues with retrieval contexts. The architecture of pedagogy is therefore an architecture of ritual. Small, standardized sequences in classrooms convert chaotic attention into predictable learning cycles, lowering the cost of sustained focus and increasing the return on instructional time. Design for work benefits when rituals are made explicit. Offices that surface temporal structures, such as shared opening scripts, focus blocks, and collective pauses, change the social ecology. These explicit moments reduce the anxiety associated with signaling and permission. Social scripts act as affordances for collective attention. An office that ritualizes a moment of quiet cultivates a shared norm and reduces the cognitive friction of deciding whether deep work is permissible, thus permitting more complex collaborative projects to progress without constant negotiation. Technology is ambivalent. Notifications and feeds fragment attention by compressing rewards into microtransactions. Yet technology can also scaffold rituals when designed to respect temporal boundaries. Modes that suppress non-essential signals during designated focus windows, persistent archives that support nightly reflection, and interfaces that require minimal friction to enter focus states are technological companions to ritual. The design ethic is to privilege durability over momentary spikes, to create tools that amplify ritual rather than erode it. Equity must inform ritual design because not every environment permits the same sequences. Crowded homes, shift work, and economic precarity restrict the ability to perform slow practices. Public spaces that provide pockets of quiet, community programs that offer shared ritual times, and workplace policies that protect focus zones democratize access to time anchoring practices. Attention justice therefore calls for infrastructure investment and policy design that redistribute cognitive bandwidth more evenly across populations. Aesthetic coherence improves adherence because the sensory texture of a ritual influences emotional resonance. Proportioned timings, harmonious sounds, and tactile cues align physiological states with intended attention modes. A ritual that is ugly or discordant increases resistance. Design choices about rhythm, tone, and light are not merely decorative. They are functional, shaping the probability of practice persistence over time and transforming repetition into pleasure. Narrative embeds ritual into meaning. Practices that are connected to stories become easier to sustain because they are tied to identity and to communal memory. Naming a ritual, recounting its origin, and retelling the reasons for its persistence translate routine into heritage. These stories provide a scaffolding for intergenerational transmission, which explains how rituals survive across epochs, while surface details adapt to new tools and contexts. Failure modes reveal the fragility of poorly designed ritual. Rituals can calcify into dogma, become tools of exclusion, or be co-opted for spectacle. A ritual adopted blindly loses its connection to purpose and may even produce harm by legitimizing neglect. The antidote is reflexive review. Periodic ritual audits ask whether the practice still serves the original aim and whether burdens fall equitably across participants. Adaptation is the practice that keeps rituals alive. Measurement supports informed repair. Metrics such as continuity of practice, latency to re-engagement, and subjective coherence surveys provide data that guide improvement. Measurement should be humble and contextual rather than punitive. The point is to learn and to iteratively adjust sequences so that they function better in lived contexts. An archival habit of measuring outcomes produces evidence that supports resilient ritual ecosystems rather than merely policing behavior. Historical cases illustrate ritual as infrastructure. Seasonal rites in agrarian communities translated ecological cycles into social calendars that coordinated planting and harvesting. Guild rituals encoded standards of craft and apprenticeship so that skills transmitted reliably. Monastic routines produced intellectual output by stabilizing attention across generations. These are not relics. They are practical case studies in how ritual manages scarce cognitive resources and sustains complex practices over extended time. Rituals provide scaffolding during crisis. When systems face stress, predictable sequences reduce panic and generate coordinated responses. Emergency protocols rehearsed as rituals shorten reaction times and clarify roles. The capacity to perform under stress often depends on prior, ritualized rehearsal. The investment in rehearsal is insurance against entropy when shocks arrive because practiced actions reduce decision load when cognitive bandwidth narrows. The politics of ritual matters because public rituals declare what communities value. Societies that ritualize maintenance allocate attention to repair and stewardship. Policies that ritualize inspection schedules or routine public works embed care into civic life. Conversely, rituals that celebrate spectacle while ignoring maintenance produce brittle systems. Designing civic rituals becomes a lever to distribute responsibility and to compose public time in ways that favor durability over transient display. Small, low-cost rituals often yield outsized returns. A brief synchronous silence before a meeting, nightly logs of small wins, or a community time to gather and clean a shared space are low friction yet high leverage. These mini rituals amortize maintenance costs across networks of participants and create the conditions for larger projects to persist. The scalability of ritual resides in its marginal cost profile, small acts that compound through social reinforcement. A core ethical dimension arises because ritual design shapes what is seen as worthwhile. Elevating certain acts to ritual status concentrates attention and resources. That selection process must be subject to moral scrutiny. Rituals that privilege market spectacle can starve the practices of care that support long-term flourishing. Ethical ritual design therefore prioritizes repair, equitable access, and the distribution of attentional labor across communities. Rituals evolve by necessity. Adaptive rituals preserve core cues while adjusting surface elements to remain functional in changing contexts. The stability of a ritual depends on whether its affordances continue to align with practical needs. Adaptive rituals are intentionally reviewed, kept simple and rooted in sensory specificity so that they translate across modalities and technologies without losing purpose. The urban scale benefits when city design intentionally includes nodes for collective ritual. Parks, markets, and quiet reading rooms are public scaffolds for temporal anchoring. City planners who understand the cognitive value of restful public spaces design for rhythms that support attention across neighborhoods. The urban choreography of ritual fosters civic rhythms that make collective maintenance plausible and supports neighborhoods where repair is visible and habitual. Collective trust reduces friction. In high-trust communities, rituals require less policing and more mutual reinforcement. Trust is a lubricant for coordinated attention. The lower the verification cost, the more efficient the distribution of cognitive labor. Rituals in high-trust networks therefore sustain deeper collective focus with lower overhead and permit more ambitious cooperative projects to unfold. Language frames rituals. The way rituals are named and narrated shapes uptake. Good metaphors compress complexity and make practice accessible. A phrase that captures the mood of a ritual becomes a mnemonic that eases repetition. Story and slogan matter because they reduce the cognitive cost of remembering why an act matters and because they anchor rituals to shared meaning. Craft practitioners reveal how ritual supports mastery. Craftspeople who ritualize preparation, tools, checks, and reflection discover that these sequences preserve skill and enable innovation. The ritual is the workshop protocol that protects tacit knowledge and creates space for exploration because it reduces the entropy of day-to-day operations and stabilizes the conditions under which novelty can be cultivated. Schools of design and architecture have a role in teaching ritual literacy. Training in how to parse environments and to see durable sequences equips communities to build their own rituals. This civic curriculum is as practical as plumbing or electrical work because attention infrastructure requires ongoing upkeep and occasional redesign. Teaching ritual design cultivates local capacity to tend attention and embed repair in everyday institutions. A pragmatic final layer concerns tools for cultural transmission. Ritual manuals, simple recorded guides, and open templates make practices discoverable. When gestures and timings are documented, the cost of adoption falls, and communities can experiment with local variations. Shared repositories of ritual practices function like open source for attention culture, allowing diverse groups to adapt sequences while preserving core affordances. Making ritual design visible democratizes the craft and accelerates the spread of useful patterns. Another useful practice is to design for redundancy in ritual roles. When multiple actors share responsibility for sustaining a practice, the system is less vulnerable to turnover. Redundant role assignment, paired mentorship, and distributed archives ensure that rituals survive personnel changes. This redundancy is not waste. It is insurance that preserves institutional memory and continuity of attention across time and shifting circumstances. The modest ambition of this approach is attractive. It is not to promise dramatic transformation through a single act, but to create a reliable substrate on which creativity, care, and collaboration can recur. In a noisy world, rituals are the architecture that keeps channels open long enough for slow projects to grow. They are the engineered patience that converts daily attention into generational capacity. A life anchored by thoughtful ritual accumulates coherence. Time stops being a blur and becomes a layered map where meaning can be planted and harvested. The work of designing and repairing rituals is patient and technical because it requires attention to sensory cues, social reinforcement, measurement, and equitable access. The payoff is a life with seams that hold and a public world where shared practice makes repair plausible. The task is not aesthetic alone. It is civic, technical, and moral. Ritual design asks for tools, policy, and craft combined. It asks for spaces where practice can survive and for institutions that support repair. Rituals anchor time by creating predictable portals in which attention can gather and be renewed. Through that anchoring, small acts gain scale, and the accumulation of those acts becomes the architecture of lives that endure.